I want to make a few remarks about a situation about which we are all aware. And I want to begin by just restating one of the sacred principles of our American democracy is the centrality of free speech, and in particular, the centrality of public protests in articulation of values which the protesters hold dear and want to bring dramatically to our attention. And of course, we have witnessed through our media various campus protests during this past week, including the right to protest publicly against the activities of governments and in favor of groups, the purpose for which people are affirming. But I think you'll agree with me, what we saw and we heard this week, which is certainly exhilarating in principle, these protests were quite disturbing in practice. They were simplistic and absolutist attributions of blame, essentially saying that Israel is fully to blame, the perpetrators, and Hamas is the victim, pure and simple. That's one of the problems with these protests. A second problem is involvement in these protests by non-university individuals, which of course poisons the waters in ways in which tend to unravel the social cohesion. Also, of course, there was along the way interference in the expression of the rights of non-protesting students, affirming or wanting to study in peace, to walk the campus in peace, to take exams, and to participate in their graduation. And of course, many of them eventuated in breaking the law and threatening or actually engaging in violence. And finally, last but certainly not least, some virulent expressions of anti-Semitism. These protests, in theory, important to our democracy, those who are engaged in them have obligations. They're not free to do whatever they want. But I also found quite disturbing the campus culture that champions, that is satisfied with expressing one particular view on a complex topic, along with an attendant intolerance of alternative views with which the protesters disagree. And I want to cite an op-ed piece in this morning's New York Times written by David Brooks, just an excerpt. Here is what one Columbia student wrote to one of his professors. I think universities have essentially stopped minding the store, stopped engaging in any kind of debate or even in conversation with ideologies which have slowly crept into every bit of university life without enough people of good conscience brave enough to question all the orthodoxies. So if you come to Columbia believing in decolonization or what have you, it's genuinely not clear to me, the writer says, that you will ever have to reflect on this belief. These circles have become so insular that today's so-called progressive fights tend to take place within progressive spaces, with progressive young protesters attempting to topple slightly less progressive university presidents. These fights invariably and this sentence is a gut punch. These fights invariably divide the left and unify the right, end quote. In other words, rather than engaging in robust conversation and debate, a significant amount of the campus conversations have devolved into mere assertion, the denigration of opposing views, and rigid and self-righteous dogmatism. And to the degree that this approach prevails, the university has abdicated its responsibility to foster and support robust and measured debate featuring different points of view. And so the campus sit-ins and the encampments have come to feature just this kind of dogmatic self-righteousness and intolerance. Violence, visible and verbal, becomes all the more possible under this rubric, and therefore all the more real. In other words, so much of our public conversation, and even our conversation with one another, has been poisoned by the failure to acknowledge complexity and nuance, the self-righteous assumption that my view is the only correct view, that positions unlike our own are wrong-headed from the start and even patently absurd. And so for the next couple of minutes, I want to offer an example of how acknowledgement of complexity might work. And I'm going to take my example from one of the most undogmatic texts in all of literature, the Hebrew Scriptures. And I want to point to the episode featuring the patriarch Jacob, right at the beginning of the story of Jacob and Esau. The unstated issue in this drama, as many of you will remember, is who in the current generation of Jacob and Esau will take responsibility to be sure that the organic center of the Jewish people, that is the covenant, will pass down through the generations. Responsibility for the maintenance of the covenant. Who will do it? Now remember that of the twins, Jacob and Esau, Esau is the elder. And in this kind of society, the firstborn has a special prerogative and a special right. And so Esau, by his position in the family, is going to be charged to be the one to carry on the covenant. But as the story unfolds, we come to see who Esau really is. And you'll remember this story. He comes in from a day of hunting, and he is famished. He sees a pot of soup that his brother Jacob is boiling. And he says, "Give me some of it." But Jacob is wily. "Sell me your birthright first. Sell me the right of the firstborn, and then I'll give you some soup." And Esau says, "Okay." And the Torah suggests and says, he ate and he drank and he rose and he went on his way. Thus did Esau spurn his birthright, end quote. So how should we assess the actions and thereby the character of Jacob and Esau? Jacob is, I don't think we can doubt this in the least, manipulative and therefore immoral, since he essentially stole the birthright from his brother, which is on its face a morally indefensible action. But wait a minute. Could anyone believe that the covenant is safe with Esau? With someone who would sell something precious for a bowl of soup? In Esau's hands, the covenant, as the fundamental heartbeat of ancient Judaism, is as good as gone. And if Esau is the one charged to sustain it, Judaism ends right there. That is, he is the wrong person to carry on this responsibility. And Jacob knows it. So the birthright had to find the brother who would protect it, come thick or thin, against all opposition. And in life, circumstances are always challenging. We need the right people. And therefore, I imagine Jacob reasons as follows. I'm the one who can preserve my people's precious inheritance. And therefore, I must do whatever I can, even violating principles of the common morality in order to preserve it. So the situation is complex. Jacob is the right son, but he attains that responsibility through immorality. And one could offer cogent arguments on both sides. What is primary, the common morality or the emergency of the moment? And so the matter is not open and shut. Put it this way, is our morality rule-based or is it situational? If it is strictly and exclusively rule-based, then Jacob's actions are reprehensible. But if the situational considerations are important, then Jacob's actions gain in appropriateness. Most important situations in life are similarly complex. Notice that the Torah is giving us a situation of subtlety, nuance, complexity, without telling us what the right decision is. And what is the right decision in a case like this? So this is a good example of the complexity which our tradition calls on us to be responsive to. If the Israelis bear significant blame for the excesses of the Gaza invasion, we cannot ignore the serious responsibility Hamas shares for this atrocious situation. And protest that features the one without the other has lost credibility in that situation. In other words, we must learn that our truth is rarely the only truth. That though we might be passionate defenders of our own views, others are likely to be equally passionate about theirs. And so I want to conclude by pointing to the implications of this call for complexity, which I hope you see seems to me to be the essential mission of the university, to bring out complexity and nuance and not allow us to sink into dogmatism. First, these complexities are truer to the nature of things, where simple solutions are systematically misleading. That the mode of conversation needs to combine passionate advocacy with a sense of humility. That passionate advocacy with serious attention to complexity of the issue on all sides is a necessary condition for any viable and lasting solution to the components of the problem which will not go away unless they are included in the solution. Others have their truths And no serious resolution to complex issues can happen unless both sides uphold these truths. So the ideal, in sum, is to believe in passionate and informed advocacy within the parameters of humility, of receptivity to the voice of others, to genuine listening, and a sense of compassion for the way in which others are living their lives and want to live their lives. This, it seems to me, is what our families, what our religious institutions, and what our universities ought to be teaching.